that the history of the Bengals definitely plays into my notion about this because it's the Bengals.
Really?
Yeah.
That's
technically correct.
Okay. All right. Yes.
No, but you know what I'm saying,
they're
right?
31 years of ineptitude. Yeah.
Think about this. You know who has the record for most playoff wins as a quarterback in Bengals history? Joe Burrow now shares it with Boomer Esiason. That's a thing that has happened in his first run through the playoffs. So this is not like some great all-time franchise. Even if the Cowboys finally did something, they haven't done jack for 2.5 decades, but at least I can be like, well, there was a time. There was never a time that the Bengals, even in the 80s, they were in the playoffs, made it to the Super Bowl, and then after that, nothing. I am impressed that it is the Bengals.
You're telling me that Andy Dalton, who everybody said was just as good as Dak,
what are you doing
didn't get a playoff win while he was with the Bengals?
No, because they always lost. Him and Marvin Lewis.
Who do you think it was on?
Lost.
Was it on Marvin or was it on Andy?
I think it's equally on both of them. I never understood. Marvin Lewis was like, we might hire him for our head coach later.
Is that how you feel about McCarthy and Dak?
Yeah.
Or Garrett and Dak?
That's how I feel. Probably more Garrett and Dak because
at
least McCarthy can be like, well, I won a Super Bowl. Garrett and Dak, I think it's equally on them. But
what about Garrett and Romo?
Same thing.
I'd put more on Romo.
It's just, are we that different than the Bengals then? Because I would be like, not really, because we have history, but the Bengals got sucked into a vortex of mediocrity. The Cowboys have been in that vortex of mediocrity forever. So maybe neither one of them could escape because of that.
How talented was that Niners team, Kevin?
Yeah.
The rest of the talent aside from Joe Montana. And I know this is kind of difficult for you, but
they had Dwight Clark.
They had some
Roger Craig.
They had some pretty good players on that team, and maybe those players looked pretty good to us now.
I don't know if 81 they had Roger
Not
Craig.
Roger Craig yet.
I'm not 100% sure. But
and they also in that draft, they took Ronnie Lott. So, that probably helped. But then the other thing that really helped is...
to get a top 5 defensive player of all time and at the time the greatest quarterback of all time? You think that helped?
I definitely feel like that's a fair assertion. The other thing is they had one of the, if not a lot of people do believe, the greatest coach of all time in Bill Walsh.
His innovation at that time in the game was unmarked.
And maybe Zach Taylor will turn into that, but I'm not ready to make that.
I know the Cowboys will never go down this route, and we've talked about this now for weeks. You can make the Super Bowl with a Dak Prescott quarterback.
Sure.
But you look at the Bengals, and they did not intentionally do this, but they went from an average starting quarterback who was making the playoffs somewhat on a every other year basis, 50% of the time, Andy Dalton's making the playoffs, and they end up going, we can't do this anymore, and he's getting worse. Andy Dalton was getting worse at the time. And then they got the number 1 overall pick, and I know, number 1 overall picks don't always work out, but then they got, looks like the super premium Hall of Fame type of quarterback. And I know the Cowboys will never go down this route. It's too hard to do. The Cowboys don't want to work that hard. But would you ever go, you know what, 2 years from now, the Cowboys make the playoffs one more time. Let's just say they make it next year, lose in the first round. The next year they don't make the playoffs. Would they ever go, I hate saying this, people are going to jump my butt that are big Dak fans, and I think Dak's a good quarterback. Would they ever go, Dak's never going to take us to the Super Bowl. Let's tank and let's go get the number 1 overall pick, and hopefully it's the year that there is a Joe Burrow type of quarterback.
And that's the thing, too, with Trevor Lawrence.
And then to get all the way down to 1 is very tough, too.
With Trevor Lawrence, Mike, a lot of people felt that for 2 years, 3 years about Trevor Lawrence. That guy's going to be this kind of guy at some point. Joe Burrow jumped up out of nowhere for a year.
That's a great point.
It's supposed to be 2,
so
right?
Exactly.
Just landing the right year.
It looks like a major mistake right now.
Getting it that 1 year, that right time. And again, this is very early in Burrow's career, but I mean, just based off what we know in the short career he's had, going back to college too, it looks like all these great things, but to pick the season, this would be a bad season to pick.
Right.
And you know what? Maybe it turns out we look back and go, crap, nobody knew. But this would be the best. You have to, it all has to work. Just like the I don't know that the Spurs were tanking for Tim Duncan.
It all worked out
Tim
because
Duncan was there.
David Robinson got hurt.
Yeah.
And then they said, just lose them all.
Yeah,
and see what happens.
And Tim Duncan just happened to be the guy that was the right one that year.
Let me just test something out. You just say better or worse than Dak. All right? And this is just this decade or going back to last decade. Sam Bradford.
Worse.
Okay. Cam Newton.
He's better than Dak.
Yeah.
His career is going to end up. I mean, right now,
Equal.
it would be very tough. He has an MVP and went to a Super Bowl.
Absolutely. Andrew Luck.
He's better than Dak. It just was shorter. So Dak's going to have a longer career, but I mean, he was making the playoffs every year until injury.
Jameis Winston.
Dak's better.
Jared Goff.
Dak's better.
Baker Mayfield.
Dak's better.
Now, I'm going to cut it off right there because then I know it gets. But just think about that. Those are 6 options. 2 of them were better than Dak.
Oh, number 1 overall picks.
Yeah, exactly. And if you want to go back even
and it's
further.
tough because then Dalton quit. I mean, sorry, not Dalton. I'm sorry, Luck quit.
Yeah, exactly. But even if you go back before that, all right, Stafford.
I mean, he's in the Super Bowl now.
I would say it's not easy. That's a discussion, but I would lean towards better than Dak.
Jamarcus Russell.
No.
Alex Smith.
Whew. Dak's better.
Same category.
Okay. But
I don't disagree with Mike either.
even then, of that group of 9 that were the number 1 overall pick, 3 is what we came up with that were better than Dak.
That's a tough thing to do.
And the Cowboys live in fear. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Like if I can go back and there's a question that I could ask Jerry again, I would probably be like, why do you think that this franchise lives in fear? Is they would never make this bold a move. But to be fair, I bet a lot of people wouldn't because of that fear. Because of 3 of 9,
And you know
you're
what's
going to
tough
get a
for-
better quarterback.
And what's tough for me is this. I'm going to be honest here. It's just my opinion. It doesn't mean it's factual at all. I see getting Troy Aikman at number 1 overall pick as a major factor in turning around for about a decade. The Cowboys were a bad franchise. Not horrible, but the second half of the 80s, horrible. Getting the number 1 overall pick and getting Troy Aikman started the change. There was a lot of other things that went into it. Jerry buying the team, Jerry hiring Jimmy Johnson, trading Herschel Walker. A lot of things went into it. It had some things had to do with Troy Aikman, but a lot of other things. But from my perspective, and maybe Jerry has too much of this perspective too, of trying to relive the 90s but it all started with getting the best quarterback in the draft.